You guys seen that video floating around recently of the dude that's flying off of a bike into midair, and they're all saying he's probably cheating on you and he's actually trying to find a way to go ahead and build himself up? Yeah, that's just my brain really trying to go ahead and fly towards October, or really even September, so that way we have college football back on our television screens. Welcome on into Sunday Funday. It is February 23rd, 2025, and we still have a jam-packed show. Yes, college football. We still got a ways away, and there are a ton of things that are going to change in the sport in the not-so-distant future. But who am I but just your humble servant to continue to talk about our favorite sport every single week? Jam-packed episode, top non-conference games that could have major implications on the 12-team college football playoff next year. Garrett Nussmeier, a lot of people are buying hype into LSU going into 2025. I am not one of them, but I am buying hype that Garrett Nussmeier is QB1 in the SEC moving forward. What do we make of OU going into year 2 of the SEC? And what are the realistic expectations for Hugh Freeze down on the plains of Auburn this upcoming fall? Real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit that ring notification, and subscribe to the channel because we talk college football every single day, whether it's on Sunday Funday or on one-off shows. I have an announcement to give you in just a few minutes, so don't miss out on that. Make sure that also you're following us on the socials. That way you keep up to date with everything that we're doing, from college basketball to college baseball. SEC Unfiltered is not only the #1 SEC entity on the internet, but we also are the only one that does most coverage surrounding every single sport. So you want to be locked in on the socials: TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson. That way the back and forth conversation can always continue. And make sure you check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. As always, the show is provided by FANDUEL. Go visit FANDUEL.com/SECU and join in the madness today by signing on up and get $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. So lay down $5, win that bet. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets. What's not to love about that? Sign it up and join in the madness today at FANDUEL.com/SECU. So quick announcement. Dave Shumate and I are getting back together. We're bringing the band back. And I've already brought this up to you guys a couple days ago that we are going to do a Q&A. We are going to have a questionnaire, a mailbag of sorts. Dave and I are going to be going live. Brand new show, The Overtime Drive. Mondays and Thursdays, every single day moving forward, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. So that show is going to have a subject on Mondays. Break down the show, full on. We have conversations, we have subjects, we have content that we're going to give you for days on end. And then on Thursdays, we're going to have a mailbag. So every single Monday, Dave and I are going to drop on our socials. So make sure you're following us at Mr. Cole Thompson and at Dave Shumate SEC, us, for questions that you want answered. And then on Thursday night, we're going to do the mailbag. So every single Thursday, make sure that you are signed on up. That way you don't miss out on any of the content, any of the action. But that is the plan moving forward for when it comes to having the actual mailbag show that we've been trying to work together. Thursday nights, 7 p.m. Mondays, full-on content. The Overtime Drive starting tomorrow, 7 p.m. Central. Okay. Top non-conference games in 2025. These are the ones that could have massive implications on the SEC championship and going to the college football playoff. Because remember that Texas A&M and LSU both lost in week 1 last year? But here's the thing. There was a shot for both of them still to make it down to Atlanta going into the middle of November because they were non-conference losses. So don't look now, but these games could actually have significant implications on which teams are still fighting for a spot in the 12-team playoff. First one, I think, is Auburn versus Baylor. Baylor was one of the hottest teams in college football down the stretch last year. They won 6 games. Dave Aranda saved his job. Sawyer Robertson, really good quarterback. They were one of the better teams in college football that did not get enough graces. But Auburn, so far, has been one of the better teams in the transfer portal this offseason. They've done a good job of bringing in premier talent. They got a better quarterback in Jackson Arnold. They feel really good about their #1 wide receiver in Eric Singleton. And this feels like a must-win year for Hugh Freeze. It is critical down on the plains for Hugh Freeze to start off hot. We will know a lot about what Auburn is, what Auburn has to fix, who Jackson Arnold is underneath this new direction, what Sawyer Robertson can be moving forward. Down in Waco week 1, it is a game that is not getting enough love, but I promise you, it is one that will have implications for both the Big 12 and for the SEC. Naturally, LSU Clemson, that's got to be the biggest game. If you told me that that's a playoff preview for whether it be the quarterfinals, whether it be the semifinals, whether it be even a national championship, I can believe it. I'm high on both schools. I am. I know that we are an SEC entity, but I believe that the 2 best quarterbacks in college football will be playing in that game. down in the other Death Valley. I got K. Klubnik as QB1. I got Garrett Nussmeier as QB2. This feels like a must-win year for both programs in different directions. Everyone is buying stock into Clemson being the top team in the ACC, and for good reason. They got the quarterback. They got a better offense. They finally made some moves that were different underneath Dabo Swinney, and they've been building to that direction for the last few years. This feels like an all-in, hey, we are still the cream of the crop of the ACC. And then you look at LSU, they pivoted. They went from having all of their money and resources put into the Bryce Underwood sweepstakes and said, okay, let's go to work. We have portaled in talent like crazy. We believe that we are good enough to win this year. Clemson hasn't beaten a ranked SEC team since 2019. They will have a shot to do so on their home turf come August 31st. LSU hasn't won a home opener underneath Brian Kelly yet. He's 0-3. Last year against USC, back-to-back years against Florida State. This feels like a game to where if you want to set the tone early on, if you're LSU, proving that things are different down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that this is the year that we can finally start buying in hope, you got to win this one, and you got to win pretty convincingly. Texas, Ohio State, it's a rematch of the Cotton Bowl semifinal by logo, but it's a new regime of quarterback. It's Arch Manning's first start as QB1. Now, I'm not saying that it's not his first start because we saw him play a couple games last year, but it is his first start as QB1. There is no more security blanket. Quinn Ewers is not coming back in to save you. It's your job now. What's this offense look like? And what is the tone going to be like down in Austin? Because of you are replacing 3 starting wide receivers. You are replacing 4 starting offensive linemen. You do have a couple of new pieces that are added in defensively. I still believe Texas is the cream of the crop in the SEC. I have no doubt that they're going to be a player in the college football postseason picture. But then you got to throw in Julian Sayin, national champion. This team, so many people forgot about what Julian Sayin was. 5-star quarterback coming out of high school, goes to Alabama. Nick Saban retires. He also follows Caleb Downs to Columbus, Ohio. And just because we haven't seen him doesn't mean that he is not polished. I don't think that St. Clair is going to win the job. I truly believe that this is Julian Saying's team moving forward. A win here almost guarantees a home playoff game if they miss out on the byes. I think both these teams are going to the playoff next year. I am very high on what Ohio State can do. I know they've lost a lot offensively and defensively, but it's Ryan Day. It's Ohio State. They find a way to be able to portal in the right pieces. They find a way to land a top 5 recruiting class every single year. Winning this game in the shoe for either team really sets the tone for 2 rosters that believe they are good enough to win a national title. How about week 2, Vanderbilt versus Virginia Tech? This is a sleeper game. So remember what we thought last year about Virginia Tech. Okay, well, what I thought last year about Virginia Tech. I thought they were going to be a sleeper going to the college football playoff. They were going to be that team that was like SMU. And lo and behold, remember what happened. The SEC got welcomed into Diego Pavia and what he was capable of. Took the game to overtime. Pavia gets the win. They set the tone. US Bank Stadium was still under construction. Like, you guys remember that. When the Commodores were celebrating, there were like cranes and still construction sites in the background. They weren't a full stadium just yet. Well, now they're traveling to Blacksburg, where the best tradition in college football resides. Keep in mind also that Vanderbilt is going to play Georgia State week 1, and Virginia Tech is going to play South Carolina on a Monday night down in Atlanta for the Chick-fil-A opener. That's back-to-back SEC games. It's Brent Pry's 5th year. He has got to start showing that things are trending in the right direction. Things have got to start buying in to what the Hokies want to be, because if you eventually lose that morale, you lose that moral compass. You don't have that stability to be able to come back and say, well, we'll get him next year. You were supposed to have him last year with 97% returning production. So if you start off 0-2, is this the beginning of the end for change that is inevitable in Blacksburg for yet another head coach trying to be what actually Frank Beamer was for a while ago? Michigan versus Oklahoma in week 2. I think it's a fork in the road moment for the conference. I think it's a fork in the road moment for both these programs that didn't meet expectations last season. But I do believe that one of these teams could have a strong trajectory with a win. Michigan, one of the best ways to close out 2024. Win against Ohio State, win against Alabama. They did a good job of portaling in the right pieces. They get a new running back in Justice Haynes. They feel really good about the quarterback room. Mikey Keene maybe starts week 1. But week 2, we get the Bryce Underwood show. We feel really good about that direction. And then you got Oklahoma. Oklahoma brought in the right offensive coordinator, brought in the right quarterback. I think that they would be better on the offensive line. I still have high hopes for what this defense can be underneath Brent Venables. A win here, I think that gets you to 9 wins for either side. And both these teams, I think right now, there are so much unknowns about what they can be making the college football playoff. With a win in this game, that might end up signaling that change is coming, that we are in a good position to where we can win those games that are supposed to be toss-ups. For Oklahoma specifically, if they want to be an 8 or 9 win team next year, I think they have to win this game. If they don't, then we may be talking about change coming towards Norman by the end of the 2025 season. How about Kansas versus Missouri? The border war is back. This was peak hatred in the Big 8. For those of you who are too young, the Big 8 was before the Big 12. This is one of those games where I think peak SEC would lean and say a Big 12 roster that finished 5-7 last year, they can't march into Faurot Field and beat us. Oh, I politely disagree. Do not doubt Lance Leipold, Jalen Daniels, and a better version of the offense. It's a revamped unit on the offensive line. They have a very good wide receiver core. I still like their rushing attack. I hated Jeff Grimes as the offensive coordinator. He left to go to Madison this offseason. They promoted Zbikowski from inside. He's worked specifically with Jason Bean and Jalen Daniels, and I don't know what to expect from Missouri at this point. I like Missouri a lot. I think Missouri is a solid team with their schedule. 6 games out in Como before they ever hit the road. They could easily be the sleeper in the SEC, similar to Tennessee last year. But the last thing that you want to do is allow a Lance Leipold team to get hot. They may end up being what Arizona State was last year, where they beat an SEC team early on in the season. They use that morality to go ahead and pivot themselves into that conversation for a 10-win season. And Kansas, lo and behold, they're going to the college football playoff as the representative from the Big 12. Notre Dame plays host to Texas A&M in week 3. Last year, game was pretty close going into the fourth quarter. A lot of people look at that score and say Notre Dame handled business. No, it was a back-and-forth battle all the way up until the final 15 minutes. And then, unfortunately, you watch as Notre Dame's offense kind of took that next step forward. Jeremiah Love punching on in from the red zone. The defense wasn't good enough. That was Mike Elko's first game. That was Mike Elko's first game out in College Station. Well, now he's got a full year under his belt. And the offense is going to have to take that next step forward. The offense is going to have to be the backbone of this team, at least early on in the season. You get Marcel Reed back. You have solid running game with a healthy Lavian Moss, with a healthy Ruben Owens, who I think is going to do wonders for this offense, especially underneath Colin Klein. Casey Concepcion comes on in. Mario Craver is that vertical wide receiver. You like the offensive line for what's returning talent-wise. That should be the backbone. And again, Notre Dame, they'll be breaking in a brand new quarterback. They'll be breaking in some new wide receivers, some new defensive players. This is a moment where if you look at Texas A&M, and for all of us that still doubt Texas A&M, not being that team that can get over that 8-4 hump, they get this win. Now they're starting off potentially 3-0. Now they're gaining that momentum. And it shows you that Mike Elko has made the necessary changes from year 1 to year 2, that the team actually that we believe is still the same Aggies of old will not exist anymore. How about Florida versus Miami in week 4? You know, that's a game where I think a lot of people are going to look at, well, what happened in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party where DJ Lagway gets hurt early on, but Carson Beck has 3 interceptions. Lagway actually looked like the better quarterback in that game. If you guys remember, had the big 43-yard touchdown pass to Aiden Mizell connected. Florida was leading going into halftime. They get hurt. Then you got throwing Aiden Werner. When I look at where you are in terms of what Miami is, I have questions when it comes to their wide receiver room. I have questions when it comes to their offensive line. I really, really do think that when you look at DJ Lagway taking that next step forward, this is one of those games where, hey, year 1, probably not going to be built, probably not ready to go ahead and take control. Year 2, full season to learn underneath what a guy like Billy Napier wants, the buy-in from the culture, a solid defense that last year forced 3 interceptions against Carson Beck. You get to have that game out in Coral Gables, get that signature win, carry yourself. Florida, again, that's a team that a lot of people, I think right now, they have no idea what to make of them. They may end up being a team that finishes 6-6, 9-3. One of these games, that's enough to where we kind of go ahead and turn it. Okay, now Florida goes in that conversation of being an actual college football playoff team versus a team that maybe ends up missing out on a bowl game altogether. Notre Dame, Arkansas, week 5. The Irish have like 7 must-see games this year. They play Boise State. They play NC State. They play Texas A&M. They go to Fayetteville. And the thing that we know about Sam Pittman's rosters, they have a way of upsetting a team after a bad loss. Like, they found a way in 2021 to beat Lane Kiffin. Last year, they beat Tennessee. In 2020, they had 2 wins against top 25 teams. Really good, solid year with wins against Mississippi State and Texas A&M. That was 2021. My apologies. 2022 was like top 15 win against, Mississippi State. Still, is this one of those games where like Taylon Green balls on out and has like 365 passing yards and 3 touchdowns? What do we make about the run game with Braylon Russell being the lead guy? Does the defense find a way to force 2 or 3 turnovers? Is this one of those matchups? Because we know one thing about Arkansas, they're going to be the ranked team in 2025. I don't know who it is, but the fact that this game is at home, to me, does matter. And maybe that's a sign to where, okay, we are still holding out hope that Sam Pittman can be the right guy moving forward. And last and certainly not least, this one's a wild card, but I feel like I had to throw it in there. Mississippi State versus Northern Illinois. Dude, you lost to Toledo last year. Like, Mississippi State lost to a MAC team last year. I can forgive losing to Arizona State, a Big 12 team, because when you look currently at what Arizona State eventually was, they made the college football playoff. But you lost to Toledo, and it really wasn't a good game. It was a terrible game. It was awful by all means whatsoever. If you lose to Northern Illinois, who was just riddled by the transfer portal, you just got one of their star receivers in Cam Thompson. I think at this point, you kind of figured out Jeff Lebby's not the guy. We got to go in a different direction. There are things that need to change if we want to get back to the level of consistency out in Starkville. To me, that is a game I am circling because of when you lose to one MAC team, I just got to see that you won't fall for it twice. So those are the games I have. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think? I actually do believe that some of these games are really, really prominent. What do you think are going to be ones that need to be talked about a little bit more? We got over 350 people watching right now, so real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, follow us on the socials. That way you keep up to date with everything that we're doing here at Mr. Cole Thompson as well if you want to follow us. And remember, this episode of SEC Unfiltered Sunday Funday is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because FanDuel is your home for live NBA betting. Even if you miss the first few minutes of a game or want to go ahead and pick it up with a fourth quarter comeback, you can make your picks from the first whistle to the final buzzer. So just because you're running late doesn't mean the bets have to be late. Plus, you can go ahead and combine your live bets for same-game parlays for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to play it, now is the perfect time to join. And new FanDuel customers get started today with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. So lay down $5, win the bet, go get $150 in bonus bets. Just join today at FanDuel.com/SECU. That's FanDuel.com/SECU for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Disclaimer: must be 21 plus and present in select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus in DC. First online real wager money only. $5 first deposit is required. Bonus issued with non-withdrawable bets, which expires 7 days after a street. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-877-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-HOPE-8NY or Hope NY in New York. Okay, so real quickly, let me have a sip of water. We'll get back to this in a minute. Okay, so a lot of people I'm seeing right now buying stock into LSU. That is totally fine, but let's have a serious conversation. LSU going into 2025 feels like it has to be a must-win year for Brian Kelly. And you know what? I'm not ready to go ahead and buy into the Bayou Boogie juice just yet. I have been burnt by this stuff. I've woken up with a really bad hangover after believing that this was the year for the Bayou Bengals. So I'm not ready to go ahead and drink that Kool-Aid. What I will say is I do believe that Garrett Nussmeier is the best returning quarterback in the SEC for 2025. My top 10 quarterback ratings, he is #2 in college football. And if you tell me based off what I saw last season can continue to grow, he may end up being the best quarterback in college football for 2025. And you know what? Here's the bottom line. I understand that there are going to be a lot of people that doubt Garrett Nussmeier, and you have your reasons too. But remember that this is a kid that when people thought was a terrible quarterback, still threw for over 4,000 yards and finished with 31 total touchdowns. He was the offense. Whether or not you want to admit that last year LSU failed to achieve expectations, losing to Alabama in sporadic fashion, how terrible the defense was. He was the offense. They were 115th in rushing. They were 114th in yards per attempt. They were 121st in rushing touchdowns. They had nobody outside of Caden Durham. And if they couldn't take that next step forward, well, then unfortunately, they were forced to throw. Garrett Nussmeier averaged 40 pass attempts per game. So he was literally winning games and losing games on his own. And I understand there's going to be a lot of people that want to point out how many interceptions he threw. He had 12. I get that. Here's my counter argument. Garrett Nussmeier had 525 pass attempts last year. That was the second most in college football. That was also the most in the SEC. Can anybody tell me who was number 2? I'll save you the trouble. It was Carson Beck. How about number 3? It was Quinn Ewers. Both of them had less than 80 pass attempts, and they still had the same amount of interceptions. So when you're expected to throw it 40 times a game, don't you think that eventually a defensive back is going to pick up on some of your throws, some of your soliloquies, and then be able to go ahead and turn it back the other way? And still 12 interceptions on 80 more pass attempts when Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers had the exact same. I think you got to realize there's going to be more margin for error when you have to throw it more. Here's the good news. It's year 2 of Joe Sloan's system. It's year 2 for him calling the shots. And Garrett Nussmeier has even said, I know that the system was going to be a little bit different than what Mike Denbrock ran, but I do believe that there are some similarities. Well, now there's nothing left to show. Now you expect Caden Durham to be better. You expect the blocking to be better. You expect the wide receivers to be better because everyone has a clear understanding about what works for Sloan and what changed for Denbrock. I actually think that right now, when you look at what Garrett Nussmeier can be, the untapped potential is real. It is. And I have fallen for this trap 2 years in a row, and I won't do it a third time. Year 2 of the LSU quarterback. So 2019, I remember going into the year and saying Tua Tagovailoa was the best quarterback in college football. Tua Tagovailoa was going to be better than Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow proceeded to end up having the greatest year in college football history for my money when it comes to a quarterback, won the Heisman Trophy, led LSU to a national championship. Last year, or 2 years ago, I said that Jackson Dart was going to be the best quarterback in the SEC. And Jayden Daniels had a good first year. Beat Alabama, got to 10 wins. But I said that it was going to be Jackson Dart. And then Jayden Daniels proceeds to have the greatest year for the SEC, becomes the 5th quarterback all time to have over 1,000 rushing yards and 3,000 passing yards. Number 1 scoring offense in the country, number 1 passing offense in the country, ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. So I'm not falling for the bait when it comes to Garrett Nussmeier in year 2. A dude that threw for over 4,000 yards and is the only quarterback returning in college football to throw for the 4K marker. It's another year understanding the offense. And I think that the other thing that's really important is that he's going to get better. Every single time that you do anything in life, you get better with more repetitions. I get better doing this live show. You get better commenting. You get better when it comes to doing things as a chore with your significant other. You do better things at work. So I think that when you look right now at what Garrett Nussmeier can be, with over 1,000 snaps as QB1, he's been in every situation. Nothing is going to be unfazable for him. He's going to know what it's like to throw on 3rd down with an all-out blitz coming his way. He knows what it's like to play on the road in a hostile environment with 100,000 screaming fans begging you to make a mistake. He knows what it's like to have to lead a game-winning drive because if he's done it before, did it against Ole Miss, 4th and 5. They call verts. They say, you know what? Find Aaron Anderson, go ahead and get the win, take us to overtime, connect with Kyron Lacey, game on over, look at us, a top 10 victory. He has been in every situation. And there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC that haven't been there. Alabama's got a new starting quarterback. Jackson Dart's off to the NFL. What do we make of Lenore Sellers and DJ Ladway going into year 2? How about Georgia? We don't know who's going to be the starter. Is it going to be Gunnar Stockton? Is it going to be Pelusi? What do we make of other teams like Kentucky? What about Texas A&M? Marcel Reed, can he live up to expectations? I am very high on John Mateer. I think that he is going to be a stud passer in 2025. But do I think that he is ready to go ahead and have that same type of persona as a guy like Garrett Nussmeier? What about Nico? You're going to ask Nico to step on up without a solid run game or an unknown run game? I know what to expect from Garrett Nussmeier. I've seen it. And in a down year to most people, I believe that we're going to see even better results. The best part is he's going to have, I think, a better supporting cast as well. People think that last year, 2 great wide receivers, Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Good job. I think this year is even better. You brought in Barian Brown from Kentucky. I think he is a game changer. Go back and remember that game against Ole Miss. Big time play on 4th down. The Wildcats do not win a conference game without Barian Brown, and now he goes down to Baton Rouge. You still have Xavier Thomas, who I think is going to take another step forward. Aaron Anderson didn't lead this offseason. You're going to have a healthy Chris Hilton. How about Nick Anderson? When he was at Oklahoma, year 1, touchdown machine. Superstar, did everything that you wanted in terms of a wide receiver 1, just was injured last year. What if he's fully healthy? That's a mismatch nightmare inside the red zone. And I think you're going to have a better run game. You're going to be able, I think, trust what Caden Durham can be, and I think you're going to be able to trust the backups. There's a really good shot for LSU's offense to be as dominant as it was in 2023, where it's number 1 in passing, number 1 in scoring, number 1 in red zone efficiency, as long as they can run the football. And as long as they have that secondary punch, we're going to see, I think, a better Garrett Nussmeier, to where I don't think 5,000 yards is off the table. I don't think 40 touchdowns is off the table. We just watched as Joe Burrow did it from 2018 to 2019. And then 2 years later, Jaden Daniels from 2022 to 2023. Who's to say that we can't see that same growth and development from Nussmeier going into 2025? And then eventually he ends up leading his team to a 10-win season. They punch their ticket to Atlanta, and then they make the college football playoff. I'm not going to jump that far. I think it's far-fetched to jump that far right now with LSU, because if we've watched them in years past win a big-time game and then lose a matchup that they shouldn't. Last year, get a victory over Ole Miss, prove that they're trending in the right direction, and then back-to-back heinous losses to Alabama and Florida that knocked them out of the college football playoff conversation altogether. It's more than just Nussmeier. My final thought on this, and I want to move on, is think about the quarterbacks that have won the national title. You need experience to go to the postseason. I don't think that that's wrong to say. And then you look last year what Quinn Ewers was able to do and what Howard was able to do. You also can throw in guys like Dylan Gabriel, what he was able to do. There's a reason why they were viewed as standouts. They had multiple years of starting experience underneath their belt. But does always the best quarterback in college football win the national championship? Like, if you honestly look back, name the last time outside of probably Joe Burrow in 2019 that the best quarterback in college football that year won it all. You can make a case for maybe Trevor Lawrence. You can make a case for maybe Mac Jones in 2020. But honestly, it's usually a full team thing. It's a production thing. It is everyone understanding their assignments. It's the run game, giving you a secondary punch. It's the run defense, making sure that you're not giving up 5 yards of play. It's your secondary, creating turnovers and giving the ball back to the offense in positive territory. It's your play calling. It's your offensive line, protecting your quarterback. It's having that other resource that gets you to that next level. And so Garrett Nussmeier may end up being the best quarterback in college football next year, and still LSU finds itself going to the Liberty Bowl or going to the Texas Bowl or missing out on the college football playoff altogether, and Brian Kelly's seat is warming up even more. We could see that happen because it's a team sport. And in the SEC, you and I know this as well as anybody else, it's one in the trenches. LSU last year had a stellar offensive line. They had a terrible defensive line. This year, they have a better defensive line underneath Blake Baker going into year 2 of the defense. But what about the offensive line? How well do you feel about replacing guys like Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Miles Frazier, Garrett Dellinger? How do you feel about those guys all now hitting the open market and going to the NFL? Do you think that Josh Thompson is going to be good enough to put you in a prime position to where your offense is going to be humming when it comes to pass protection? Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is good enough to be the guy to lead you to a college football playoff. And if I'm just going simply based off of LSU quarterback play, I think that LSU could be in the playoff. They really could. They could be a number 1 seed. They could be hosting a game down in Death Valley. They may end up being the team that wins it all and go to Miami. And the goals are still there, and I do believe that it's possible. But I look at it from a Garrett Nussmeier standpoint. Only Garrett Nussmeier, nothing else. He can do it. He can be a guy that takes you to your end goal. The rest of LSU has got to set it up. So if you want to go ahead and drink the Kool-Aid of what is Bayou Bengal culture, I'm totally cool with that, but I'm not ready to jump on that. I am ready to say that when you look right now at where LSU is, maybe not. When I look at what Garrett Nussmeier is, Absolutely can. We got over 400 people watching right now. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel because we talk college football every single day. We break down everything that you want to know. And by the way, starting tomorrow, we got a new show coming on out, the Overtime Drive, 2 times a week, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. Dave Shoemate and I, Mondays, we're going to have content that we have already put together. Thursdays, mailbag. So you can sign on up. Go ahead and join the mailbag. I'm going to put a questionnaire out on my Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. Make sure you're following over there. Make sure that also you're following Dave Shoemate at Dave Shoemate SEC. We're going to answer the questions whenever we come to it. So make sure that you go ahead and like that tweet. Give us your questions. That way we don't miss out on the content. Sip of coffee real fast. I spend so much time talking to you that sometimes I forget that my coffee got cold. Okay. What are realistic expectations for Oklahoma going into 2025? Well, this is a double-edged question because there's going to be the Oklahoma fans that have their expectations, and then there's going to be my expectations. So, Brad Venables in 3 years, 6-7, 10-3 with a signature win over Texas in the Red River Shootout, 6-7. Now, the offense was sporadic last year. It was banged up. Brand new offensive line for Bill Beatonbow to work with. Weapons were dropping left and right. You benched your quarterback in week 4. You fired your offensive coordinator. You had 2 new guys running the show. You still made it to a bowl game after turning back to Jackson Arnold. And honestly, if a few things went differently, we're talking about, I think, Oklahoma in a completely different light. If a few things are different on the offense against Missouri, you probably win that game and you finish the year off 7-5. If things go your way a little bit differently against Navy, where you have better wide receiver play, where Michael Hawkins isn't running for his life the entire time, and you don't get that 2-point and you get that 2-point conversion, well, now we're talking about an 8-5 team. So the offense last year was terrible. They were one of the worst in college football, 97th in total points, 113th in total yards, 118th in passing yards, 67th in rushing yards, 130th in explosive plays, and they gave up the most sacks in college football. So this offseason, Brent Venables said, all right, let's get to work. And he goes in the transfer portal and he finds himself a quarterback in John Mateer. And he finds himself a brand new offense coordinator in Ben Arbuckle. And Arbuckle comes from the spread offense, comes from the air raid, but it is a little different. They like to run the football. They like to utilize the quarterback as a runner. And the best part is that John Mateer, who was one of the more sought-after quarterbacks, Miami wanted him, North Carolina wanted him, Oklahoma gets him, already has a relationship. I don't care what anybody says. If you have 44 touchdowns last year and over 4,000 total yards of scrimmage, you're a good quarterback. I don't know if that's going to translate to the SEC with the same amount of metrics, but I do believe that you are a good quarterback. And I believe that John Mateer is a top 10 quarterback going into this year. I would have him as QB4 in the SEC going in right now, simply based off of his stats. But the question is, what are realistic expectations? What are your goals going into the year if you're Oklahoma? And be real, because everyone knows what the goals should be for Oklahoma. It's a blue blood program. It is a dominant program. They have respect. They have morale. And more importantly, they have resources that should never allow them to sit below the paddy wagon of an underwhelming team. But you look at your schedule and you look at what you didn't bring into the transfer portal. What are your realistic goals? When you have games on the road next year against Tennessee, against Alabama, against South Carolina, what are your goals next season? 9-3, 10-2, 8-4. For me personally, I think 8-4 is a solid year. I think 8-4, year one, new offense, that's a unit that ends up finishing top 50 in almost every single category. Top 50 in passing, top 50 in rushing. You're not allowing too many sacks. You're seeing the growth of the offensive line take that next step forward. You're able to have a stable RB1. You have a quality here from Deion Burks fully healthy. I think that 8-4 is a very solid season. You get 2 ranked wins, and you find yourself in the conversation playing meaningful football going into the month of November. Those are my expectations for Oklahoma. You beat Texas, you beat South Carolina, you beat Tennessee. And then you lose, and then maybe you beat Michigan. And you lose every other game, along with, beating Temple and Illinois State. I think it's a good year. But I also know my expectations are a little bit different than what are those out in Norman. Because if those in Norman are prideful, they believe that they should never be sitting below a 10-win marker. Even though they are going to lose some players, even though they are going to lose some coaches, there are some people out in Norman that do believe that they are good enough to be a team that should be competing for national championships every single year. And I agree with you. Because if I know what the expectation is in Oklahoma, I know what that crimson and cream logo means. I understand what winning the Red River Shootout's all about and setting a standard out in your country, out in your land. You don't want to be a team that ends up finishing bottom half when it comes to your recruiting. You don't want to be able to see your team finish right alongside Oklahoma State. You want to be a team that trends upward every single year. And so what is 2023? That's going to be the big question. There's 3 goals that I think I have for Oklahoma going into next season. Goal number 1, do you have the right coach? Was 2023 just a fluke year for Brent Venables, where they get a win over Texas in the Red River Shootout, but then they lose to Kansas and they lose to Arizona, and they ended up having a really good quarterback with Dylan Gabriel that they let walk over to Oregon? Was it a fluke, or was it actually just the standard moving forward? Last year in the SEC, bad offensive line, bad quarterback play, inconsistent wide receivers, but now you're back to that 8-4, 9-3 season, and you got the right coach. And I believe Brent Venables, from a defensive standpoint, few are as good as him in the sport. Few. There are probably a handful of names that if you were to pick a defensive coordinator, whether as head coach or as a simple play caller, you would pick over Brent Venables. But is he more than just a defensive play caller? Is he a full masterclass? Is he a full identity when it comes to being able to lead a program? Because some people are able to lead one side of the football. Other people are able to lead a program. Do you have that out in Norman? Question number 2, do you have a quarterback that can resonate with the culture? Because when I look at Norman and when I look at Oklahoma, and when I look at Memorial Stadium, the teams that were always the most feared in the Big 12 were the ones that had stable quarterback play. Baker Mayfield put on a show every single Saturday. Didn't matter who he was going against. Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas. He was going to make sure that everybody knew who he was. And he carried himself with that swagger and that poise and that pedigree that was certainly, I'm QB1 in college football. Don't mess with me. John Mateer's got that moxie. John Mateer's got that spunk. He's got that attitude of where I believe that I am the best quarterback. I don't care that I come from the G5 level or that I played in what was the Pac-12 that was really a Pac-2. I don't care that I played against a Mountain West team. I'm good enough. Do you still carry that momentum and that mantra with a new offensive coordinator and Ben Arbuckle down in Norman? And then eventually the team starts playing with that image, because of when you have a quarterback like John Mateer that already has a good relationship with Ben Arbuckle, he's kind of like that secondary teacher on the field. He's telling where the wide receivers need to turn. He's telling where the running back needs to cut. He's making sure the offensive line is lined up properly, and he's going ahead and calling the audibles. You got to make sure that you have that, because the best teams in Oklahoma over the last decade, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams for a hot minute when you had him, Dylan Gabriel, all those teams, quarterback that was able to define who you were, define your roster. And question number 3 that I have, can you still be sustainable in a brand new conference? Because if everyone's talking about Texas right now, and well, they should. Texas has been a team that the last 2 years has gone to the college football playoff and exceeded expectations. But a lot of people forget about Oklahoma running the Big 12. Before Steve Sarkisian came to town, it was Oklahoma's conference to lose. Every single year they were playing in Arlington. They were the team that was definitely punching its ticket to the college football playoff. In a 4-team playoff format, Texas barely was even in the conversation. Meanwhile, you're looking at Oklahoma, 11-1, 10-2. 11-1, 12-0, punching their ticket to Arlington, getting a win over Iowa State or Kansas State, Texas. Didn't matter. They were going to the playoff every single year. Do you still have that same capabilities? Are you still recruiting at the same level? Are you still bringing in the right type of names? Are people still looking at Oklahoma as a feared program? Because I can tell you what, they're not going to sit by idly and wait for them to turn into a feared program. They are going to be a team that people want to buy into. And I believe Oklahoma should be. When you are as pedigree as a program as Oklahoma is, you better be punching out the right amount of talent. There are first-round talents galore coming out every single year. Oklahoma should be at that standard. Do you have that? Do you have the same amount of recruits? Do you have the same type of personnel? Do you have the same type of attitude? Because if you do, games against South Carolina, even though South Carolina, I think is going to be a good team in 2025, should be at worst 50-50. Games against Tennessee, you should be able to march into Neyland Stadium and have a victory. You should be able to feel really good about how you're playing against Texas. You should be feeling really good about where your offensive line is, where your defensive line is, what type of personnel that you're pushing out, because if you have the type of positions. When I look at Oklahoma, you should be in that conversation every single year. Every single year. That's just my opinion. If your offensive line steps on up, if your defensive line steps on up, if you have a good number 2 receiver opposite of Deion Burks, you should be a team that is signaling itself for an 8-win season. But I believe 8 wins is good enough for Brent Venables in year 4. What do Oklahoma fans feel? Is it good enough? Is it good enough if you're saying, I don't know, top 25 in scoring, top 20 in passing? What's good enough for you when it comes to guaranteeing Brent Venables gets a 5th season? What if it's a lot like Florida, where Florida last year, you get the buy-in from the culture, the team starts off really sluggish, it feels like Billy Napier is going to be shown the door, and then eventually everyone starts to see the wins. You get a couple of upsets down the stretch. You finish 8-5, and now you're bringing in the right recruits, and now you feel really good about your quarterback coming back for another year. Is that good enough for you? Because for me personally, if you get to 7-5 with a bowl victory, I think that's a good spot. I think 8-4 is over-exceeding expectations with your schedule. But I also know that Oklahoma fans, you're completely different than me. You feel a little bit differently about where your team should be every single year, at least going into 2025 and beyond. Anything is possible. I really do. Anything is possible, I think, for Oklahoma in 2025, including making the college football playoff. If things go their way. Now, a lot of things have to go their way, but it may or may not happen. We got over 450 people watching right now. So real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel. It's free. It takes literally 2 seconds. We are on the race to 25,000 subs. We are going to get there, I think, by the end of spring practice. We don't know what's going to happen with spring football. Maybe there's games, maybe there's not, but we are going to give you as much content as possible. So just make sure that you look really quickly, that you are subscribed to the channel. It takes like literally 2 seconds. Nothing else I think is going to be that big of a deal. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button, and that way you keep up to date with everything that we're talking about. Okay. What about Auburn? Auburn is such an interesting team to me going into 2025 for multiple reasons. Year 3 for Hugh Freeze. And a lot of people are buying stock that Freeze has got to overexceed expectations this year. For me personally, what are the realistic goals for Auburn? Well, if you look back at their team last year, wasn't that bad of an offense. People want to go ahead and point to Peyton Thorne, and there's a reason to believe that. But when you look at the rest of the unit, with Keandre Lambert-Smith as your wide receiver 1, you also throw Cam Coleman in as a quality number 2, what you had in the run game with Jarquez Hunter. Auburn was masquerading as a bad team. There was probably 4 or 5 games where if you just take away the turnovers, Auburn wins. And they probably are going at least to 9-3. And that feels like that you're trending in the right direction for Hugh Freeze. But again, a lot of young players last year had to step on up. A lot of guys that many people probably would not see play at a program like Alabama or Georgia or even Texas, they had to see significant reps last season. And so now they go out in the transfer portal. They bring in a brand new quarterback, Jackson Arnold, former Oklahoma quarterback, Elite 11 MVP. He's now down on the Plains. They believe in him. They think that he is a really good player. But they made sure that they weren't just focusing on him being the sole solution. So they go land Deuce Knight, the 4-star quarterback. They also land Ashton Daniels from Stanford. So they have a better quarterback room. They still have a very good wide receiver room. They went out and they brought in the best player in the transfer portal in Eric Singleton. Offensive line, bring in 3 new starters. Defense, it's more veteran. They pay a couple of extra $100,000 to give a pay grade to DJ Durkin, who had a really good year last year, despite having a ton of incoming young role players that had to step on up. So what are realistic expectations for Auburn this year? For me personally, I said Auburn has to make that same jump as Miami in year 3. And I've been talking about Auburn for a while like this. If you caught any of the show in the past on Sunday Funday, I have mentioned that Auburn needs to be a big-time player in the portal in year 3. Year 1 is about establishing the culture. Year 2 is about building a foundation, feeling like that your team is trending in that right direction. Year 3 is about striking big. Year 3 is about making sure that you are a team that now is in the running for a college football playoff berth. And so far, Auburn's done that in the transfer portal and on the recruiting trail. And I think that that's a big thing that people got to look at when it comes to Auburn. Auburn is one of those programs where the expectations are never going to change, but the results are never known. One year you can go 10-2, the next year you can go 4-8, and everyone can expect that to happen. Everyone can expect either one of those outcomes to occur. You can get a win over Alabama in the Iron Bowl down in your territory, and then you can lose to an Arkansas roster that finishes 3-9. Like, that is Auburn to a T, and it has been that way for decades. But the expectations are never changing on the Plains. When you play against Georgia and Alabama every year, they expect you to recruit at that same level. They expect you to build your rosters at that same level. They expect you to be as talented as those teams. Maybe not entirely where you're guaranteeing your spot in Atlanta, but you are at least putting together rosters that are good enough to compete for a championship. That is the expectations. And your rivals every single year are never changing. You play against Georgia, whether it's between the hedges or you're going on the Plains, and you're playing against Alabama in the Iron Bowl. And both those teams have won national championships since you last played for a title in 2013. So the expectations are always through the roof. When I look at Auburn, I just want to see them be better. My personal belief for Auburn, play meaningful football in the month of November. Hugh Freeze, for my money, has not met expectations. And the reason I say that is because of, yes, last year I will give him a pass. You have a 5-7 finish. You're taking a step backwards rather than a step forward, but it was a young core of players. Yeah, you had some veterans like Jarquez Hunter and Keandre Lambert-Smith, but your offensive line was a little bit young. Your defensive line was a little bit young. You had some starters in the defensive secondary that were making that transition from high school. I still look at what you've done and how you've been able to bring in the right talent. Last 2 years, top 10 recruiting classes. They're en route to have a third top 10 recruiting class. They've been able to build that culture. They've been able to kind of figure out, this is what we want to be as a team. We know what works and we know what doesn't. But you were so stagnant on believing in Peyton Thorne last year as your starting quarterback that it ended up hurting you. And you ended up going 5-7, and you had the 4-interception game against Cal, and you had the 4-interception game against Arkansas, and the Kip 6 that happened. And lo and behold, now you're missing out on the bowl game. Well, you don't have that excuse anymore. At some point, you start wondering what more is needed to be proven. We talk about a guy like Brian Kelly not meeting expectations through his first 3 years in Baton Rouge. Well, he's got good quarterback play, and he's got a good offensive line, and he's got terrible defensive execution. That's Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze has been able to land 2 premier classes with stellar talent that is turning down places like Alabama and Georgia and Texas and Ohio State and Michigan and USC and Florida State and Clemson, all to go to the Plains. And he's not doing anything with it. So this is a year where now it's a more veteran offensive line. It's a year where it's a more veteran running back room. It's a year where it's a more veteran wide receiver core. You went out and you brought in the right pieces at wide receiver to be your new replacement for Keandre Lambert-Smith and Eric Singleton. You feel really good about your defensive line headlined by Kendrick Falk. You feel really good about your secondary. You feel really good about your linebackers, albeit young. Still, you feel like that they've done enough. What more do you want to see? What more do you need to see? In my opinion, I'm just looking for stability. Maybe not even a 10-2 season, but at least you should be in the conversation of 8-4, 9-3. Baylor week 1, Ball State, South Alabama, Oklahoma. All 3 of those games should be winnable. And then, of course, you got to throw in the Texas A&M game where you're playing in College Station. You already beat them in 4 overtimes. Who's saying that you can't win that game? 5-0 should not be off the table. You welcome Missouri this year into your backyard. You nearly beat them in Faurot Field with a backup quarterback before Brady Cook decided to go ahead and believe that Percocets was the ultimate solution to carrying him to an actual victory. Arkansas, can you win against Taylor Green and Bobby Petrino this year? Kentucky, can you continue that dominance? Can you not lose to Diego Pavia on the road for a 4th time, Hugh Freeze? Let me just remind you on that one. For a, 3rd time. Alabama, your backyard. The voodoo magic that seeps through the soil at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Can you win that game? No more Nick Saban. It's all about Kalen DeBoer. And as Alabama continues to get better, and as you're watching as a team like Georgia continues to get better, can this be the year where it all comes together for Auburn? I think Auburn at worst should be an 8-4 team. I think at best they should be a 10-2 team competing for a spot in Atlanta. And I think both are possible. I also think 4-8 is possible. Bad quarterback play, inconsistencies when it comes to the play calling, and Hugh Freeze just doesn't get the job done. I could see all that happening this year. I'm not expecting Jackson Arnold to be the second coming of Cam Newton. I'm not expecting him to be even as Nick Marshall-esque level, but I am expecting him to feel better about his situation because if he's no longer in Oklahoma, where the expectations I think were through the roof for him to be the next guy, I think that having stellar wide receiver play is going to be phenomenal. I think that they're going to be a good defense, not elite defense. If Auburn just is a solid team that's competing in the month of November when they play against Vanderbilt, when they play against Mercer, when they play against Kentucky, when they play against Alabama, they end up being a team that goes 9-3, 8-4. They lose the Iron Bowl, but they beat Oklahoma and they beat Baylor and they beat Missouri, and all those teams are ranked. So be it. That to me is a good solid year. That to me is a year that when you look at Hugh Freeze, you're trending in that next direction. They spent money in the transfer portal. They spent money on recruiting. They've done the necessary things that are essential for you to be successful in college football. I think that's enough. But that's enough when it comes to what are the minor goals. What are the real goals are, how do you get to that next jump? How do you make that necessary move to where you feel like that your team is actually competing for more than just mundane, mediocre averageness? That's my opinion when it comes to Auburn. That's my opinion when it comes to Oklahoma. That's my opinion when it comes to a lot of teams in the SEC. But for Auburn this year, when I look at what Hugh Freeze is supposed to do with how he's been able to retain talent, at some point, you got to bring in the right personnel. And it can't just be simply, oh, we're a quarterback away. You were a quarterback away last year, and look at what that did to you. You went out, you brought in 3 quarterbacks, and none of the right guys. So unfortunately, I can't use that excuse. You got to have a little bit more than that. We are over 50 minutes at this point. I have things to do today, but that's going to do it for this edition of Sunday Funday. Here's the good news. Dave Shumate and I, again, we are back tomorrow. Live stream. The Overtime Drive premieres tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. We got a jam-packed full of content ideas for you. Thursday night, we are doing the questionnaire mailbag. Going to put out a tweet. Make sure that you're following me on social media at Mr. Cole Thompson, at SEC Unfiltered, at Dave Shumate SEC. Get your questions on in. We'll do a live reaction. We'll have them posted. That way you get to be a part of the content, and that way you get to have whatever questions that you want answered about the SEC moving forward. And it doesn't even have to be SEC related. It could be about my life. It could be about Dave's life. It could be about my dogs. It could be really about whatever you really want to talk about, including college basketball and college baseball. We're even going to do a little bit of that. But till next time, I am Cole Thompson. Make sure that you like the video. Hit the ring notification, subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss out on any bit of the content that's coming your way. Make sure that you're following us on all the social channels at SEC Unfiltered. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson and check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. I'll be back tomorrow night for the Overtime Drive. Make sure that you are locked in here. And as always, enjoy your Sunday. Remember, life is always fun. It's always free. Peace.